Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. Her name is Maureen Boyle, and she published a book titled The Ghost, The Murder of Police Chief Greg Adams and the Hunt for His Killer. And right now it has 301 five-star reviews. There's an audio book on Amazon as well. This is not Maureen's first book. She also wrote back in 2017, Shallow Graves, The Hunt for the New Bedford Highway Serial Killer. She is an award-winning journalist who's been a crime reporter in New England for decades. She's earned a number of national and regional awards for her writing and reporting, including being named New England Journalist of the Year 3 times. And her first book, Shallow Graves, was honored by the Public Safety Writers Association. She's currently the director of the journalism program at Stonehill College in Easton, Massachusetts, and lives in New England with her family. And you can see a lot of her writing in her books at her website, which is her full name plus writer at the end. It's Maureen Boyle, Boyle, writer.com. So you can see that. But this was a really interesting story. I'd never heard about this particular criminal case, so I was fascinated to read and hear about this. It's a very well-written book. So I'm delighted to have Maureen Boyle on the show. So Maureen, welcome to William Ramsey Investigates.
Thank you. And I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. So for people who may not have heard your background, these books, can you kind of talk about your writing career, kind of maybe some of the other journalism you've done, what led you to write Shallow Graves and then this book, The Ghost?
Yeah. Well, I've been a writer just about all of my life, and I've been a journalist since high school. And I found myself drawn into police reporting for most of my career, police and court reporting. So I've been doing this type of work for daily newspapers for decades. With my first book, Shallow Graves, A Hunt for the New Bedford Highway Serial Killer, I was actually a reporter in New Bedford at the time at the daily newspaper there called the Standard Times of New Bedford. I'd been there for a while. And in that case, a number of women were reported missing, and and bodies started showing up along highways. And no one knew what was going on. All of the women in Shallow Graves were drug addicted, and so their backgrounds were troubled, primarily because of their drug addiction. So I was covering that as a reporter, and during that period of time, I really did think that the killer would be found. The short version of what happened in New Bedford at that time, the 11 women went missing between roughly March of 1988 and September of 1988. And no one really put all the disappearances together until probably late August, September of 1988. And by the time that police put it all together, the disappearances appeared to have stopped. And they discovered that the women were dead. So 9 of the 11 women were eventually found along highways surrounding the city of New Bedford. New Bedford is where they were last seen. For those that aren't familiar about New Bedford, New Bedford is a large fishing port, commercial fishing port in New England. It is often the largest in the country. It is primarily a working class community. It's a very tight-knit community. There are, large families that are very tight-knit. People have a tendency to put roots down into the greater New Bedford area, and they don't leave. So when this happened, when the disappearances and eventual discovery of the bodies happened, it really struck a chord with just about everyone in the community, because everyone knew someone who was tied to the victims, whether they went to school with them, whether they were related to them, either by blood or by marriage, a friend of a friend. It really took a toll, an emotional toll on the community. and
Yeah,
it's
New
still
Bedford
fun.
is just south. It's directly south of Boston. It's kind of the
Yep.
southeastern part of
Yeah.
Massachusetts, right? Close to
Yes.
Providence or
Yeah. It's close to
Rhode Island.
Providence. It's actually closer to Providence and Boston. It's 45 minutes from Providence. And for anyone who has driven to the Cape from the greater New York area, you would be driving, as you're driving on 195 to get to the Cape, you would go right past New Bedford. So anyone who's gone to the Cape and has been going along the southern coast of Massachusetts, they'll have gone past New Bedford at some point. So in the New Bedford case, by the time police realized that they had a serial killer in the community, he had already stopped. So as a result, it was very, very difficult to track where the women had once been, who the killer might be. One of the very main problems in the case was that the women, by the time the women were found and identified, police couldn't figure out where they had been last seen. There was a couple, maybe just a couple of the victims, where they had a very strong timeline on what happened, where they were last seen. But for the bulk of the victims, they did not have a really tight timeline. So it was very, very difficult to track who was the last person to have seen them, if they had gotten into a car, if someone had picked them up. That was a really big problem, as well as the fact that their bodies were found months, for the most part, months after they went missing.
So I never had heard of that case. So I never heard of the New Bedford Highway Sewer, but there's been other ones. I think there's one on Long Island. There was a highway sewer. So it must have been something odd like that. So whoever was doing it was hiding the bodies. They weren't leaving them in plain sight to be discovered.
No, but you know what? The killer wasn't hiding them very well. What the killer was doing was pulling up along the side of the highway, getting out of the vehicle, and picking up the body and dumping them right off the highway. But not enough, further in enough so that you would not see the bodies if you were driving by. But if you stopped along the highway and walked in a few feet into the brush, that's when you could see the remains. And that's how the first two bodies were discovered. The first body was discovered by a woman who was driving up one of the roadways in Freetown, which is right outside of New Bedford. And she had to use the facilities, so to speak. And there was nothing along that roadway, and she pulled over and walked into the brush and discovered one of the remains. And the second body that was found was two men on motorcycles who pulled over along the highway and walked into the brush and discovered the second body.
So the police somehow found that 11 disappearances and deaths were attributed to one person, or was it a group? How did that?
Well, they believe that it was one person. There was 11 women went missing. Only 9 of the bodies have been found. There are still 2 women who are still missing, and they believe that they are still out there someplace. They just haven't, probably just by happenstance, have not been found.
Well, so that's it. There was no resolution to that case then, or no just suspects or anything. Just
they had suspects. They had a lot of suspects, and I think that was one of the problems, or one of the issues. And that's one of the things I find most frightening, is that they had so many suspects. And even in the community, people were looking over their shoulders saying, this guy is pretty weird, and this guy is pretty weird. And what about the, so-and-so's ex-husband or so-and-so's ex-boyfriend? It was an interesting time, and it still is. And they looked at doctors, lawyers, dentists, They looked at police officers. They looked at members of the Coast Guard. They looked at fishermen. The one theory was that perhaps it was a fisherman from the South who came up into New Bedford and was the killer. They looked at whether it was, again, whether it was a police officer or someone of authority like that, and that because the women may have gone willingly with them. They looked at possible any drug dealers that they may have had contact with, because the point that was really the key in the case was all of their drug use. And so the period of time, someone was asking what the period of time did the women disappear. They disappeared between roughly March of 1988 and September of 1988. And
so all in that kind of a short period of time, relatively. So like one a month. Wow.
Yeah. And, because they were all adults and they were not, there wasn't anything that was a wow moment there was only 2 cases where it was, oh my God, a police report, missing persons report was filed immediately. And those were the cases where they were able to really have a really strong timeline. It was 2 or 3, a fairly decent timeline. But in many of the other cases, people were reported missing weeks or months after they went missing. And in at least 2 cases, the victims were never officially reported missing.
Wow.
Until after they were found dead.
So they were in the drug trafficking. Were they prostitutes, or kind of like living on the lower socioeconomic ladder, like all of them?
Well, no. Some of the women did have a arrest record for prostitution, but not all of them. The common thread in all of the disappearances were that all the women were addicted to drugs. And and you have to remember, in 1988, unlike now, in 1988, there was not, at least around here, there was not as plentiful of drug treatment programs for women as there were for men. So, and I would see that as a reporter, because I knew, and I had interviewed a number of women who were addicted primarily to heroin during that time. And they would try and struggle to get into drug treatment programs. And there was such a long waiting list for it. And then by the time a bed was available, that window of opportunity in their mind was gone, and they were back using very heavily.
Wow, I never heard about that case. The New Bedford highway serial killer. Fascinating. Yes. So that was 2017. You wrote about that. This book that you wrote, The Ghost, 2021, right? That's kind of when you put it together after you published Shallow Grave.
Yes. And what's interesting, excuse me.
And this one, I mean, the title is The Murder of Police Chief Greg Adams. It happened his death was Saxonburg, Pennsylvania. So, yeah, I mean, can you kind of talk about the background? It's really fascinating because this death happened, but there's a lot of backstory to this book, The Ghost. A lot of factual backstory.
Well, there's also a tie to the greater New Bedford area also. After the Ghost was in the process of being published, I mean, Shallow Graves was in the process of being published, I was thinking of, okay, what will be the next project? And excuse me, and this case came back up. This involves the murder of Saxonburg Police Chief Gregory Adams. Saxonburg is a very small community in Pennsylvania. It is what had been described to me as, Saxonburg is like Mayberry, USA, and it really is. It's a lovely small community, where everyone knows each other, where people walk downtown. It's just an absolutely lovely community.
In West Pennsylvania, right?
Yep.
West.
Yes. It's about an hour from Pittsburgh. And the police chief, he was one of two police officers on the force. The police chief it was shortly before Christmas, the police chief had pulled over a vehicle late in the afternoon. And where he pulled him over was about a block and a half away from the police station. And the person that he pulled over attacked him, beat him, and fatally shot him. And then the person took off. They believed, based on the blood that was found there, that perhaps the chief had also shot the suspect. So they also checked, excuse me, some of the local...
It was December 4th, 1980. So
yes, this goes back a number of years.
Comes to the present, but it goes back.
Yes. And the suspect just vanished. Police obviously converged right on the scene immediately. State police and police from throughout the area, and they were blocking off roads. They had helicopters up in the air, and the suspect vanished, literally like a ghost. Eventually, they were able to identify the suspect, and it took a little bit. And remember, back in 1980, you didn't have the internet. Most departments were not computerized, so they were doing a lot of hand sifting through records and phone calls. It was very much boots on the ground type of thing, old school law enforcement. But they were able fairly quickly to identify the suspect, and it was a man named Donald Webb. He was a low-level mobster from the greater New Bedford area. He was living in New Bedford at the time, but he was hanging out with a group of other thieves who were known to police as the Fall River Gang, because most of them were from Fall River. They would travel around the East Coast. They did most of their jobs outside of where they lived, in Pennsylvania, in Maryland, Virginia, Connecticut, outside of their home area. Thinking they wouldn't get caught. And sometimes they got caught, but most of the times they didn't. So the police went to the suspect's home, talked with his wife, and his wife said she didn't know where he was. They were, staking out her house, staking out the homes of his associates, and they were coming up dry. They followed his wife, they followed the associates, and this went on for a number of years. And eventually, Donald Webb was named one of the FBI's most wanted list. So there was also a reward for his capture, but no one was talking. No one was saying where he was. The search for him took them to Canada, to Miami, to a wide range of places. They interviewed people in California, in the Midwest, and they came up dry every single time.
Right, but that was a mystery. But the mystery was also this guy when he was arrested, it was under a different name, Stanley Portis, right?
Yes.
So he had all these varying different names, and even Webb wasn't his birth name, right?
No, it was not.
Perkins, right? Yeah.
Yeah, Perkins. Webb was another family name that he was known as. But yeah, he would use a variety of aliases. And at the time that he was stopped by Chief Adams, he had a fake driver's license in the last name of Portis, which was Stanley Portis, which was the name of his wife's late husband. So and that's how they were able to backtrack it when they realized, this name, and the people in New Bedford recognized the name of who it was and that he was dead, and that was an alias for Donald Webb.
Right. Can you talk about Donald Webb's background before 1980? Because this wasn't his first crime, right?
Oh, no, not at all. He had been in and out of jail and prisons for much of his life. He had done, at one point early in his career, after he got out of the service, or he was told to leave the service, might be more appropriate, he went to one of the bases and stole a safe. He robbed a bank in Boston. He had did a lot of home robberies of business people that he and his crew believed had cash in their houses. They would prey on a lot of restaurant owners who were known to have cash at home. Prior to the killing of Chief Adams, he and a couple of his buddies were in New York, upstate New York, and they were pulling a scam of going up to houses, claiming to be members of the city or the county, and they wanted to check, like the meters or checking out something in the house. Then they went to a home of elderly couple and this couple was very, very suspicious. I think it was the wife was at the front door and talking to him, and they wanted to go into the basement. They said no. The couple said no, and they saw one of the suspects going around to the rear of the house, and that is when they notified police, and that's how the crew got caught at that time. And after they were caught, they were arraigned, and they skipped out on bail. So Donald Webb, when he shot the chief, was wanted. It was a wanted man for skipping out on a crime in upstate New York. Now there was, some speculation that he fought the chief because he didn't want to go to prison. However, the way things were in 1980 with the technology, it was very, very difficult in 1980 to check warrants. So it was a whole process. Today, police can just, call it up on the laptop in their vehicle. But back then, it was not like that. Often, especially in the smaller departments, they would have to call dispatch, and then someone there would have to call the state police, and then sometimes someone in the state police would have to check with their dispatch. So it was a very long, convoluted process. So if he had not attacked the chief, he probably would have been able to just go on his merry way. And I think that's one of the saddest parts of it. But prior to the killing, he had been seen, as part of the investigation, as they're backtracking to see where he had been prior to the killings. He had been, he had some other dealings with the state police prior to that. And one interesting little tale is he had locked his keys in his car, and it was running, and he didn't have an extra set of keys. It was a rental car. He didn't have an extra set of keys, so he called the state police to help him get into his car, and the state police in the area came, helped him, brought him to a local dealership, and that dealership had called the car rental, the place where the car was out of, to get the key numbers to make a new key. And he went on his merry way, thanked the trooper. But the next day, he went to the barracks and left a bottle of very good liquor on the counter for the state trooper. And he told the desk person, tell him this is from me, and it's my thanks for him helping me out. So, and the state police remembered that and remembered that the whole situation there. And that's also one of the ways that they traced him back to Massachusetts, because when he got that key made, it came back to a dealership in Taunton, Massachusetts, and a real name. So they were able to tie him to Massachusetts yet again.
And he was some type of either soldier or something affiliated with the Patriarch crime family, right?
Oh,
Out of Providence. Wasn't there an affiliation there?
He was, well, he was an Italian, so he was not a made man or anything like that. He had some distant affiliation with them, where he would, often sell items to him. So he had some ties to the Rhode Island mob.
Right, and he found it interesting that the day of the killing of Adams on December 4th, 1980, Patriarch also got arrested. So the timing was a little curious timing.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting, during that period of time, there was, so much going on with the Providence and the Boston mob. A number of people turning up dead and, getting arrested and things like that. So that was an interesting time.
Right. And it was an interesting time. And one of the things you mentioned is a case that I know of that happened around that time. His group was called the Fall River Gang, but around there at that time, the police were involved with another serial killing called the Fall River Cult Murders, which I've covered. Right. So that was also strange happening. They were almost juggling time between this case and that one. Right.
Yeah. Well, during that period of time, the state police were juggling a lot of high profile cases. They were going to court on some retrials on a child murder case. It was a pretty horrendous case, as all child murders are. It was a pedophile killing a kid. And they were dealing with the Fall River Cult murders, so-called Fall River Cult murders, and then juggling this case. And then, a few years later, there was also the Big Dan's case.
What's the Big Dan's case? I'm not.
The Big Dan's case was a gang rape in New Bedford, where the allegation was a group of men gang raped a woman on a pool table. There was a film loosely based on it.
So that was the one with Jodie Foster?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. Okay,
so but very loosely based on it.
Yeah, a matter like it was all about consent and all that kind of.
Yeah, it was. But it was an insane time, to say the least, for the state police then. But right after once they were able to identify that Webb was more than likely in Massachusetts if he wasn't dead, Pennsylvania State Police came up here to Massachusetts, and they were working with the state police to try and locate him. However, the element of surprise to in the case was a bit lost, because as they were trying to positively ID who the killer was, who Stanley Portis was, one of the FBI agents at the time had called the state police, and the person who was in charge of the unit, who had transferred in from a local department. It was a lateral move. He said, "Oh, I know who that is. That's Donald Webb." And he apparently called Webb's wife and said, "Hey, they're looking for Donald for a murder." So she had a heads up.
Wow. So that seems to be kind of a systemic issue with New England, or at least Boston or Massachusetts, is that there's a lot of leaks and stuff like that around there. If you look at like the Whitey Bulger case.
Yeah.
Wow. So they were tipped off. I mean, and that was 1980. This case, he was a most wanted fugitive. I can't remember like who kicked him off the top 10 list or whatever, but he was on there. Webb was on there for decades, right? Over a decade at least.
Oh, for decades. Well, I think they bumped him off at one point because because of his age, they were not certain if he was still alive or not. So if they don't have, and they have a whole process for whether to keep people on the most wanted list. And one of the things is, are they still a danger, or it's is there a chance that they're dead? And because of his age, they believe that there was a chance that he was dead, and that was one of the reasons why he was eliminated. He was taken off the list.
Right. So it was just the belief that he. Wow. Yeah. It's an amazing case. Like this is one of those cases that didn't go away. Like it just until the very.
It didn't. And you know what's really, I think, frightening about it is that so many people, even in the New Bedford, greater New Bedford area, greater New Bedford Fall River area, did not even know that he was wanted. Part of that may be that, there was no social media then, but as I was looking through old newspapers, there wasn't any, major news story, cop killer is from this area, cop killer maybe, hiding here. There wasn't a big media push that you would see today. It was none of that. And I was absolutely stunned. The first story I had seen was, at least a month and a half afterwards. And it was a very small piece in the Fall River paper, and it was inside. It wasn't on the front page.
So it's almost like the police didn't really send out that notification to the public even back then. Like, hey, this guy may be around. Do you know him? Do you know what he looks like? Didn't he have some kind of, you said that he had some kind of syndrome, right? Osler-Weber or something that,
And so they did check hospitals. And at that time, they were under the assumption that he'd been shot. So they were also checking hospitals for gunshot wounds. And they came up with nothing.
But there was blood found. They found his rented white Cougar, right?
Yes.
So they found blood on that. So I think that gave them the idea. It was his type of blood type too.
Right? His type of blood. So that because of the blood, they thought, well, he must have been shot. Right. So there was, which is, which leads to, never assume anything. And I think in that case, perhaps some investigators may have broken their own internal rule of never assume anything and keep all options open. Right. But his vehicle was found in Rhode Island, so that's set a bit of the investigation into the Rhode Island area, but they were still looking very closely in New Bedford, and they were really intent on following his wife, because several of the investigators were convinced that she knew where he was. They even put up surveillance cameras on telephone poles trained on our house to see.
And the FBI was involved too, so it was a federal case.
Yes, it was.
Their agency, I forgot their name. Was it Ed? And the guy, Ed Dennis, was also involved in Chappaquiddick. So there's this little web of.
There is. Yeah, and especially in New Bedford, because it is really, it's a city, but it's a small town in some ways. Ed Denise, who had been involved, had been the DA investigating the Chappaquiddick case. He was, a side character in all of this, because when this state police from Pennsylvania came up to search for Webb, they stayed in the hotel that he owned in Fairhaven. At that time, that was one of the few hotels in the area. And with, fast forward to the current time, the younger FBI agents who had worked the Whitey Bulger case then took over this case and, did a re-examination to ultimately resolve the case. But going back to how people didn't know anything about it, I worked in New Bedford for more than a decade. And when I got to New Bedford, I'm not originally from New Bedford. When I got there in 1984, and I was covering cops in 1985, people were talking about Donald Webb's stepson, who had been a New Bedford cop at one point, and he got in a little bit of a jam, and he quit. He was they were investigating him, and then he eventually left the department. But people would talk about him, and almost as an aside, said, "Yeah, his stepfather killed a cop," and it did not hit me that he was still, out there, that he had not been arrested, which I found very troubling. If people were more concerned about, his stepson and the guy who killed someone, it was almost an afterthought, and no one mentioned to me, "Oh, by the way, he's still out there. He's wanted by the FBI." It was just very, very strange, because I would have been all over it at that time, 5, 6, 7 years later.
Right. And New Bedford isn't that big. It's 100,000, I think, in the whole general area. So it's decent size, but sometimes those little towns are, talk and small. Worried about.
Yeah. So I was kicking myself, like, where was I during all this? And no one said anything to me about this
So
guy.
it was happening right underneath the surface.
And even once the case was resolved, some state troopers said to me, "I never heard about this case."
Wow. It's interesting.
Younger troopers.
Right. I mean, it just was in a small, people trying to follow up in small parts of the government. It's odd. It is interesting that some of these cases just aren't as well publicized as others. This one should have been if this guy was on the FBI's most wanted list too. So it seems very curious. Maureen, we're at about 36 minutes. Is there anything you'd like to add? I mean, anything like to summarize? I mean, there's a lot more in this book.
Yes, there is. Yeah. And there's, I'll tell you, your listeners should definitely pick up The Ghost. There is a really great twist into this case, and that is what really hooked me into writing this book. It's unbelievable how it ends, and it really highlights the importance of law enforcement working together. And in this case, it was the FBI, state police in Pennsylvania, and the state police in Massachusetts, all three of them working hand in hand, and that's how it was solved. I don't think any one of them would have been able to solve it, but all three of them working together, each of them brought something really unique into the case, and that's why it was solved. And
people can listen to the audio version of it too, right? There's an audio version on Amazon, so people can check that out. And the best place to reach you is your website, Maureen Boyle Writer.
Yep. And I'm also on Twitter, and it's Maureen E. Boyle 1. I'm on Instagram, and I always forget all my names on all of these sites on
I'll put the
Instagram.
Maureen Boyle, Maureen Boyle 1 on Twitter, right?
Yep, and Maureen E. Boyle on Instagram, and on Twitter is, let me just make sure. I am one of those people who early on, when I was doing social media, I would sign up for all these different social media sites and then promptly lose my password.
You're not alone.
Yeah.
You've been the only one.
But on Twitter, it's Maureen E. Boyle 1.
Twitter's Maureen E. Boyle 1. Okay, I will put that in the show notes. People can follow you, follow your writing, see what's going on, see some of your other journalism. Again, the title of the book we talked about today is The Ghost, the Murder of Police Chief Greg Adams and the Hunt for His Killer. 301 5-star reviews on Amazon, published 2021. Author again is Maureen Boyle. Thanks so much for your time.
Oh, thank you very much, and thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being to the interview. Stay there for a second. Okay, so